everybody. Welcome to the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. Today, I have the great pleasure of talking to Harry Mansfield. Harry Mansfield is a best-selling author and trainer who has become known as the Mind Power Champion. She teaches how to power up your mind before it powers you down, to prevent suicide, prevent mental health problems, and achieve success. Coaching for 25 years, she has created a trackable training blueprint, which, when put into action, results in maintaining health in today's fast-paced, ever-changing world of high expectations. Harry has produced the Saving Lives podcast, showing it is never too late to change your life. Her work is to show the only way forward is to not have our heads in the sand. She gives ways to address the root causes and to take action. Welcome, Harry.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on today. I've really enjoyed connecting with you over the last sort of 6 months or so. We share some common passions around safeguarding and education in schools, around resilience and emotion coaching, and we share this subject of passionate about preventing suicide and raising awareness around suicide. So we've had some really, you've helped open my eyes to a lot of things, and I thought, wow, what a great person to have on the show today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. You're welcome. Well, I always like to start with sort of how we know each other, and we were introduced by a mutual friend who works in the safeguarding space. As you know, you guys should have a chat. I think you're kind of on the same wavelength, and that's certainly proved true. We've also both had our challenges of trying to work with boarding and independent schools to raise awareness of mental health, welfare, well-being, suicide prevention, etc. And we've both had our challenges and plenty of doors shut in our faces. So we have that in common as well.
We do. And I don't think they want to get it wrong. And I really don't think they want to get it wrong, but they don't want to be seen to be doing anything wrong. So sometimes when you were reading the bit out about my bio, that sums it up, having your heads in the sand. It is very, very easy to have your heads in the sand by shutting a door and not having a conversation. And as a result, it creates problems. So, yes, we are both singing along the same hymn sheet with that one.
Yeah. Well, how I like to go on these podcasts is I always care very deeply about kind of where people have come from, what's brought them into the work they now do. So we will definitely get into your work around suicide prevention, resilience, training, mind coaching. But yeah, so the past. Where did you start? How were things for you when you were young, and what shaped you in your early years?
I would say I'm in the best time of my life now because I didn't have a great past. I think that's a slightly different answer to the answer with regards to me realizing how powerful the mind was and how we can actually use it. If I touch, first of all, quickly on that, because that's a shorter story. So I was given the most amazing opportunity of doing a parachute jump when I was younger. And it was a weekend training course with the ex-military. And I just knew I was jumping out of that plane. And it absolutely amazed me. The only time I hesitated was when I wasn't the first to go. And obviously when the people in front of you are quite literally falling very, very fast. I did take a big intake of breath, and as such my mind wobbled, but I knew exactly what to do to get it back again. And then I had just the most amazing time because I had trained my mind correctly from a safety perspective, from a positive experience perspective. And I look back at that now going, oh my goodness, that's actually the first time I experienced how powerful the mind is, which of course is connected to my work. Then returning to my own childhood, I don't think any parent wants to get it wrong. You don't have children for it to not go well. My parents split up when I was 8 years old. And to be honest, yes, that was miserable. Obviously it was, because the norm is to have two parents and the desire is to have two parents to bring you up. But actually that was where my problem started, because other members came into the family which actually weren't as honest and as trustworthy and were manipulative and created situations for themselves which are completely inappropriate for children. So when you have your mother's partner sexually abusing you and using the fact that he's an artist as an excuse and a reason behind it, you are just having to go along with it because you are a child. And I think this is where you and I connect so well, because safeguarding is there to protect children. And behind closed doors at home, it's very difficult to get there. It's hard enough in the education system. But when there is nobody at home for you to turn to, or in my case, I did turn to my mother and I actually said this was going on. And the response from her is, well, it's art, get on with it. So, it's a difficult one. I look back on it now and yes, I've had a very tough time coming to terms with it. Wasn't my only abuser at home. It was actually an uncle of mine, abuser on the other side of the family. So it was both sides of the family. And they are, recognised by the police. They are on the list, as it were. Then I sort of went to school hoping it would be better, a boarding school. It was clear that that was the only route I was going to have. I didn't have a choice in it. I didn't go as young as you, but I was still quite young. I think I must have been about 11 or something. And obviously I was hoping for it to be better. It turned out that it wasn't. I wasn't the person that people wanted to be with. I was very much an individual, and when you're an individual in a boarding environment, it's not very easy. So then I just wanted to find somebody to be nice to me, and the person I found was somebody who was employed by the school, who was a groundsman. And they were nice to me, but the problem was I didn't realise what they wanted from me, and it wasn't just being nice to me. That person has been prosecuted now. I never actually planned to have them prosecuted. I would have said, if somebody said that to me sort of 15 years ago, I would have said, no, I'm not going there. But moments happen in your life which changed my perspective completely. And we didn't actually go through the court process, which I have to say I'm extremely pleased about, because it was quite bad enough anyway without that. You are stuck in a system that takes its time, and in order to make sure that the accusation is correct, which of course is very, very important as well, because you don't want an accusation like that to be wrong. It's miserable describing the wallpaper on the wall and what room you were in and the furniture and everything that was around you, and where else did it happen in the school, and what were you wearing, and where did they put their hands and stuff. It's horrible. It really, really is horrible. So actually, ironically, I was really lucky that when they were approached, they admitted guilt straight away. And so I didn't have to go through the months and months of a court case afterwards, because it had already gone on for months and months. I really do applaud anybody who sees through the system. I can't falter the police. The police, I have to say, were outstanding. They really, really were. And I couldn't have asked for anything else. But you are stuck in this horrible system, and it's not a particularly pleasant one. So I think then, I look at my childhood going, yeah, rubbish, and I blocked a lot out of it. I really did. I've spoken in one of the books that I've written. I talk about Harry's wall. Harry's wall was very big and very large, very wide. You couldn't find a way round it, but it protected me. And of course, that's how amazing the mind is. And I think at that time, protection is what I needed, but I was never going to get to a proper stage in my life if I actually kept that wall up there. So I did have to do something about that, which of course isn't a nice process to go through. And it's amazing how the mind works, because I had forgotten a lot. I really had forgotten a lot. And I remember sitting on the stairs on the phone to my sister, who doesn't live in the same country as me, so we don't sort of get to speak often. And I remember saying to her, I said, did that actually happen? She's going, yeah, that did happen. And I was like, how can it have happened? I literally don't remember anything. And then slowly, the memories come back, which of course are painful. And then you have to manage with your mind how you actually respond to those things. So yeah, childhood wasn't great.
Thank you, Harry, for sharing. On my, my heart is with you. The divorce at home, the new partners coming in, the abuse, and then boarding school, and then abuse again, and trying to find those safe adults around you, and that you could rely on, just wasn't there for you, and yeah, really, 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 really sad to hear the story. But thank you so much for the courage to share that, because there will be so many others out there who have experienced similar things, whether it's at home or in an institution or boarding school, scouts or sports clubs or whatever. And as we know, it takes on average over 25 years often for people to disclose their sexual abuse from childhood, um, making it so important for things like mandatory reporting to come into effect, good safeguarding in schools, trauma informed, practices in classrooms. But just, yeah, thank you for sharing. And yeah, for you then, the going away to boarding school, was it one of those ones where home was very difficult? So was there initially kind of looking forward to something different, a structure? Did that change? How was that sort of moving from home into school for you?
I think I was glad to be away from home when I was at school, and then glad to be away from school when I was at home. I think it was just the same in both places. There were situations going on in both where I just wasn't happy in either. And I think one thing that resonated when we met was the name of Seen and Heard. And that's what I think I felt all the way through, whether I was at home or whether I was at school. I just did not feel heard. And my perspective could have been completely wrong. I mean, it wasn't because I was being abused, but my perspective really, truly could have been wrong. And even in those situations, you still need to hear people because you can't get to the next stage, whatever the next stage is, unless that person is heard. And they can be completely wrong. I mean, I was accused by family members, my mother, when she did discover that I had been sexually abused by a member of staff at school. She did say it was my fault. And, that's not what you need to say to a child, a teenager as I was then. Obviously not. But I can understand the perspective that she came from because I did talk to him and I did go and play tennis in the evening after homework was done and lessons were finished because I wanted to have a nice conversation with somebody, to be nice to me. But when you're actually looking for somebody to be nice to you, there are boundaries. It doesn't go any further than the conversation and being nice. And of course, he obviously realised that there was something else from his perspective, and so he pursued it. And when you are in a situation where you are told through your growing up, whether it's at school to behave or at home to behave, to shut up and get on with things, I shut up and got on with it, and I didn't shout, kick and scream, which was another criticism that my mum had actually for me, going, well, why didn't you shout, kick and scream? Well, actually, you don't shout, kick and scream because you're always told to shut up. So actually, what's the point? So again, her argument was valid. She could not understand why on earth I didn't shout, kick and scream, and I get that. But actually, if you are, relentlessly being ignored and not being heard, you don't even bother in the end. You just literally keep your mouth shut and get on with it. And that's the way the mind works. Simply, you go with what is the normal, and you can be growing up in a family which actually, on the outside is seen to be absolutely fine, but behind closed doors, sadly, isn't. But that's what you know. That is how the subconscious mind is trained. That is, being born into a family you have no control of, with their religion, their culture, their beliefs, the way they behave, and that is what's imprinted on your mind as normal. So in a way, I also thought, well, this is actually what happens. This is normal. If you are going to the parent or the member of staff at school to say that these things are happening, and actually you're not being heard, then that normality continues. And I think that's a very, very difficult thing to break a cycle of for the person, because that's what their mind is doing and telling them because of the repetitive behaviour. And at the same time, it's being reinforced by the external influences, whether at home or at school.
Yeah, well, thank you, Harry. Thank you so much for sharing that and your insights into it as well. Clearly done an awful lot of work on yourself as an adult. But you're able to create that little bit of distance and to be able to see the complexities at the time with the adults around you, as well as your abuse, your pain that you had to go through. But ultimately, the just trying to find someone to hear you, see you, listen to you. We sadly hear too often around whether it's teachers, people involved in the schools and institutions, or it's older pupils that sort of abandoned, that abandonment, that need for someone to be close to emotionally, or appropriate touch and things like that. Because that's absent, it leaves a vacuum, and that vacuum is where predators can fill that space, because there is such an emotional need that isn't being met there. Yeah,
Yeah, definitely. And I think that when things are happening in day-to-day life, it is then becoming the norm, and you might feel uncomfortable. One of the things that used to happen was I wasn't allowed to shut my bedroom door, and I wasn't allowed to shut the bathroom door, and I wasn't allowed to shut the loo door. Now, speaking here now as an adult, I just go, that's crazy. How on earth can that be seen as normal? But because that is your home life, you don't know any different, and you are the child. And if you have raised things before that you're not happy with and feel uncomfortable with and haven't been listened to and heard, then you just literally get on with it, and you start to think that that's actually normal. And that actually, I think, is more sad than anything. I mean, obviously, the abuse is horrible, but to actually think that living a life where you're continuously on edge, expecting somebody to come around the corner, it is just not good. And as I say, it becomes the norm.
it does, Harry. Yeah, no, I can really hear you. That nervous system that becomes hardwired for kind of fight or flight and hypervigilance is, I've seen in virtually all, if not all, of the people who've come for support, seen and heard. It was my story, the other directors in Seen and Heard. Everybody in this sort of world, if you like, has an element of that hypervigilance until they do a lot of work on themselves. And ultimately, the home life wasn't safe, and the institution wasn't safe. And I think I see that across so many, and it's often used by the boarding schools themselves to say, well, it provides that structure, that sort of environment that home can't. But typically, in my experience, it's out of the frying pan and into the fire. That what you might get in structure or sports or creative outlets and things like that is lost. That there is no appropriate touch, there is no emotional connection, there is no love, and as a result, yeah, the wounds from home tend to be then cemented with attachment wounds, or the wounds of home can sort of become really hardwired in the institution. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
I think your word structure is actually really key. I think that's a fantastic word, because structure doesn't give you emotion, doesn't give you love at all. It just literally gives you discipline. And I think that it leads to so many problems. And structure is fantastic if you're training to be a sports person and an Olympian and all that kind of stuff, or you're on a diet, or you want to get fitter. Structure does help, obviously, but it isn't the answer to everything.
No, and it's not a replacement for love or parenting.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. So something that's been coming up for a lot for me at the moment is that there's, for instance, Piers Cross's film Bordering on Insanity that came out last week. There's Charles Spencer's book from last year, Very Private School. More books and radio programs and things coming up about the boarding experience. But what I'm hearing from women is that the female voice of boarding school, the female experience, the young woman's experience of the institution is not being heard as clearly as perhaps the boy's story, or perhaps the abuse, particularly the abuse side of the boy's story. So, could you speak to a little bit about how it was as a young woman growing up in a boarding school, just for the normal sort of development of self, obviously understanding these awful things that were happening at the time with the abuse.
Yeah, I mean, there are pros and cons of growing up as a boy and pros and cons of growing up with a girl. And I think with a boarding school environment, because you are all living together, both of them, the pros and the cons, are increased. And for me, girls are bitchy, they're nasty in a playground 24/7. And and I think that it definitely increases that in the boarding environment. So if you are one of the ones that you could say is bullied, or doesn't fit in, whichever way you want to describe it, it is exactly the same, really. You can't get away from it. So whilst I was on edge at home, always thinking who was coming round the corner, it's actually no different at school. And when you are in situations where people are talking about the things that girls did when you were growing up, whether it was music or boys or whatever, you are left out of that situation. If it is groups meeting others out of school, you were left out. So, in a way, I mean, if you're left out, in a way that is better because you're not actually being abused. But I mean, the loneliness, I think, is a key thing. And I remember mixing with almost the ones that were left out on every year group, and it was like there was one or two from every single year, whether it was a junior year or a senior year. And we just literally, if we wanted to have a conversation with anyone, we went to each other because we were the odd ones out. It would be really interesting actually to meet up with the people in my year group to actually say, what was your perspective? Because of course this is how the mind works. Their perspective is going to be completely different to my perspective. And I remember going back to sort of a year group get together. I didn't want to go. I was persuaded actually with my husband at the time to go because he'd had a great time at school and was thinking that this was going to be a sort of a fantastic thing to do. So I went along reluctantly, and spoke to a couple of people after the event. And they said, "Oh, but Harry, you were the one that absolutely shone. And there were others that have just done nothing with their lives and aren't independent and relying on others, etc., etc., and haven't gone off to Oxford University as was predicted. They've ended up having a child really young and things like that. And you were the one that really shone out." And I was sitting there thinking, wow, I never ever thought that they would have actually seen that in me or said that about me simply because of the experience I'd had with them for many, many years at school. Yeah, I think the toughest thing, which isn't any different for boys. I mean, yes, the way girls behave when they're younger is different to the way boys behave when they're younger, but I think it's exactly the same for both sexes. I think you just can't get away from that situation, and it's exacerbated. It becomes more of a pressure pot.
Yeah. Thank you. That pressure cooker is something I do hear very universally. There is no escape, and I've got 13-year-old girls. What they bring home from the local school up the road every night that we decompress with together. The thought of them being unable to do that on an evening basis and seeing that build over time, yeah, it really breaks my heart. And also just what they're going through developing into young women as well. It's having to do that isolated, without uh, loving adults around, then becomes that peer attachment. You come to really rely on those people around you, of your own age. But at that age, they're not equipped to hold that emotional space for you. They're scared. They're alone themselves. So it's kind of blind leading the blind, and I think that yeah, it causes me great anguish to think of my girls, having to deal with that stuff on their own in the evenings. But you're right, the pressure cooker, that term often the schools will say now it's all better now. The abuse, stuff is sort of, we're on top of that. Safeguarding's much improved, much nicer carpets. Got a therapy alpaca and a wellbeing building. One of the challenges, of course, is that the pressure has not changed. In that the striving for academic prowess, sports, extracurricular, the 70 or 80 hour school week, the lack of ability to go home, depressurize, etc., is still very much present, and so young people are still burning out.
Yeah, yeah. I think one thing that has improved, which I am really happy about, is the fact that there seems to be a better communication between the school and the parents communicating. So a child is able to say, this is what's happening at home. For example, my parents have just split up, or we've had a family member die, or I'm not very happy with, a new boyfriend or something like that. I think the schools are actually listening better. I'm not saying there's a solution from it, because obviously it's not easy for them to then pursue it. But I think actually the listening is key, because I never even brought up what was happening to me at home. I remember one time actually, my sister ended up having a knife to her throat with my mum's boyfriend, and I walked into the kitchen in the middle of it, so I just screamed the place down. As a result, my mum comes in and I said, he's just had a knife to her throat. And she didn't believe me, and then looked at my sister, and she was obviously petrified and was trying to support me and say, yes, it's true, but again was told to shut up. I think now if you're in that situation, you can at least go to a school, whatever type of school now, and say, look, this has happened at home. I don't know what to do. And I do think that's a big improvement, because I never even, contemplated taking that to school, going, this has happened at home, it's horrendous. And I do think that that's a really positive thing. But I don't necessarily think the school systems in place actually give a solution. I just think it's a listening ear.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and I agree very much that the schools that we've worked with, we've spoken to, that I know people who work in, they have improved significantly, and what we're working to do now is to really try and put welfare and well-being and safeguarding at the heart of those communities, but maybe try and reframe it a little bit, and we'll come on to that, because I know we both have strong views and passions that we're trying to bring into schools. But I wanted to thank you so much for your honesty and sort of going there with your own story, and so as kind of the end of school neared and you were starting to face out into the world, what came next for you, and what served you well from your early years, and what became a challenge?
Oh God, I made so many mistakes because of what I'd been experiencing. I thought that going around sleeping with guys was exactly the norm, because that's what I'd grown up with. That I didn't know any different. And there were two friends of mine that I was at college with, and I will never forget their kindness and their caring and compassion. They literally said, "Oh, come on, Harry. We want to meet up. We can see you're not in a really great place. Let's go to the pub and have a drink." So we did, and I was speechless, absolutely speechless, when they flagged up, going, "You're going round in a really stupid way, an unsafe way. What on earth is causing this?" And I didn't get it to start off with, because if I had been told to sleep with somebody, I had to sleep with them. I was the child. So growing up, then going into your teenage years, where actually, you do perhaps go out and have fun, but you've got boundaries, what's right and you know what's wrong. I didn't have any of those at all, because of course I'd never been taught them, and I hadn't had a childhood that was ever going to teach me the right way to have a relationship. So they're pulling me over to the side in a really nice way. I mean, I've lost touch with them now, so I would love to meet up with them and go, my God, you do not realise the impact that you had on me, where I was actually sitting there going, you're not supposed to be living like this. This is not a normal life. But until somebody says something like that to you in a way which is non-judgmental, and it does have to be non-judgmental, even though what that person is doing is completely stupid, then you actually can sort of take stock of what life should be like. So yeah, I made so many mistakes in my sort of teenage years, college years, and then I'll be completely honest, I actually married for the wrong reason. I married the wrong person because of the experiences I'd had as a child, being very controlling. And don't get me wrong, I was never ever physically abused by him, but the control was there all the time, and the manipulation, and I didn't recognize it as such because it was what I was used to. Actually, to be perfectly honest, I thought I was getting a better deal because the control and the manipulation wasn't anywhere near as bad as I'd had as a child. So actually, this must be good. I now know that's not good, and that's still not acceptable, even if it's to a lesser degree. But at the time, I genuinely thought, actually, this person's here to look after me and to be kind. But actually, the looking after, again, is such a grey area when it becomes to, control, coercion, manipulation. But if you've only ever known that, you don't see the difference. So the impact was absolutely huge throughout my life. I mean, I don't regret my marriage at all. And when I stood there at the altar, I definitely meant for better or for worse, until death us do part. And I have the most two amazing kids out of it. I mean, that side of it is just something I will never ever regret. But again, I've learned a lot. But yes, no, that the result of what happened to me, whether you argue whether it's from home and what percentage was at home, whether you argue it was from school and what percentage was school, certainly made me do some really stupid things later on in life because I didn't know any difference. I thought this was life and how it was.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that the normalization was one of the things that I certainly took away from my years at boarding school, independent school, was whether it was the corporal punishment stuff, whether it was the norms, the way we spoke, the way things were done, what was and wasn't okay, the lack of privacy, things like that. That they very abnormal things became very normalized. And I think that's where the big challenge is people coming sort of flushing out into society, into college, uni, in the world, who aren't equipped to have healthy boundaries. And you touched on that for yourself, and I can certainly resonate with a lot of that myself. I came out putting women on a pedestal, and with early childhood wounds plus school stuff, not knowing how to communicate at all with women, not knowing how to set healthy boundaries for myself, effectively a people pleaser who was scared of confrontation. And therefore, I would just kind of go along with things that didn't feel in integrity necessarily, until the point I'd suppressed it so much, and then it would come out sideways. It'd come out in other ways, for me it was drinking and all sorts of other stuff. But thank you for sharing that yeah, it really didn't set you up to have those healthy relationships and boundaries.
Yeah, I think a key thing that it actually takes away from you, which is, I mean, obviously it's sad that these things are happening, but one thing that I also think is completely detrimental is that it doesn't allow people to work out who they are, which is so important when you're growing up. Every single person on this planet is an individual. Nobody is going to be the same as anybody else. Even if you're twins, there is still a difference. And I think that gets taken away from you. And when you actually know, accept, love and understand yourself, that actually automatically gives you boundaries, because then you straight away know who you want to mix with, who you get on with, and who you don't get on with. And it actually becomes really, really simple and really, really self-explanatory. I'm not going to go out to a music concert which is going to be heavy metal ska music, because that's not me. And I will have the confidence to turn around and go no, even if I've got free tickets. I'll go and pass them on to somebody else who wants it. Give me a concert ticket that's dance, reggae, R&B, garage, whatever. I'm there like a shot. And that simplicity is exactly the same as discovering and being allowed to find out who you are. And I think in a lot of these situations at schools, the structure that you were talking about earlier, and the safeguarding side actually doesn't allow you to become who you are. And I think that that is actually very sad. And whilst as an education system is hopefully setting the student up for the future, if actually within the role of the school you are not allowing that individual to come out as an individual, because they have to be seen to fit in, they have to obviously turn up to the lessons every day, they have to do the rules, etc., etc., I think that actually creates problems. And the older you get in school, that creates even more problems, because by the time you're 16, a lot of kids in the independent system actually stay in at sixth form. They don't go off to college. So you're allowed to go off and fight for your country. You know, if you're 18 in September rather than in August, you know, you have a whole year of legally being able to do absolutely everything and vote. But then as soon as you cross those lines of the school gates, it's all taken away from you. So they are in this roller coaster ride of 1 minute you're an adult and the next minute you're not an adult. And 1 minute you're allowed to be you, and then actually, no, you're not allowed to be you because that doesn't suit the system. And I think that actually creates a lot of problems in itself. And whilst mine was perhaps more extreme than others, because mine was abuse at home, which didn't allow me to be me, it's still there. You know, if you've got a student that's with a family that does allow that student to grow up as to who they actually genuinely are, it is still slightly getting taken away within the school system, which I find quite sad. And that to me is actually setting up students to fail, because you find confidence within yourself when you accept yourself. You know, the good bits, the bad bits, the challenging bits, the awesome bits, whatever it is, you find strength from that. And I do think that actually that's quite sad when that gets taken away from you.
Thank you, Harry. That really speaks to me. So powerful. Yeah, and I practice emotional freedom technique, as you know, very important part of my coaching, my practice. It's really changed my life. But within that, we say I love and accept myself completely. Whatever it is, even though I have this anger, even though I have this fear, even though I have these strange thoughts, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. And that is part of ingraining that safe parent within yourself that will listen to you no matter what, loves and accepts you exactly as you are, and doesn't leave you and doesn't walk away. So we sort of learn to self-parent. Yeah, that idea that you're kind of an adult, that you know, the weekends or at home, and then you're back into school and you're kind of a number and you're part of the system again. I think the word, you know, we send our children away to be educated. What about growth? What about nurturing? What about development? And I know these words get used a lot in prospectuses and things, but actually, yeah, there needs to be an element of freedom with a safe container around the edges of it, of love, of holding, so that kids can bounce around and hit the walls and find the boundaries and sort of develop naturally into who they're supposed to be, without these bits being chipped off by the system and by societies. Sorry, but yeah, very passionate about that as well. So you found that then coming out into the world. What led you? What was the journey to the work you now do? You know, through to setting up your business and started to bring resilience training, writing your books, etc. What was that sort of stepping stones?
Thank you. I look back on it and I think it's mad. I would never have expected it. I've been a sports coach for 20 years, both in riding and rugby. And in both of those, when it goes wrong, it hurts, but it's not necessarily your fault. So a bird could fly out of a tree and you fall off the horse. You could have had a missed tackle in rugby, or the scrum's been pulled down and it's collapsed. And injuries happen. Anxiety comes from it because you don't want that pain again. Lack of confidence to get back up, quite literally, on the horse again, or, you know, back to a rugby match. And you have to be very strong-minded to be quite literally mullered in a rugby match. And that's all part of it. So when I was coaching and these things had happened to the people I was working with, I was discovering that more and more I wasn't correcting a physical position, and I wasn't teaching them anything about the game. I was actually working with their mind with regards to getting over the situation and getting back to be stronger and getting through the injury if they'd had an injury. So it just so happened that one of my clients said to me one day, that tip you gave me with my mind, I took it home and I gave it to my daughter, and she found it really, really useful at school. And then I was like, okay, fine. She said, and then another week she came back and she said, oh God, I had the most horrendous board meeting. I really needed to use the skills that, you had given me in the board meeting. Something started to just resonate in the back of my mind, and I was thinking, there's more to this. The mind is so powerful. As I mentioned earlier, I'd already had the experience of the parachute training with the ex-military, knowing and experiencing how powerful my mind could be. I had got through the childhood abuse and the both at home and at school, and I hadn't self-harmed, and I hadn't ended up on medication, and I hadn't ended up sectioned. I'm not saying my behaviour was great, far from it, and I can certainly admit that I was shouting and screaming, ranting and raving quite a lot of times to process and to try and get heard. But actually, I sat there thinking, there's more to this. There really is more to this. We've got to be able to look at the mind and see how powerful it is and use it to our advantage. And of course, in sport, you do. If you see an Olympian triathlete, I certainly won't be a triathlete any day soon, but, they've done the running and they've done the cycling and, they've done the swimming, and they are exhausted. They are on their knees. And what is getting them across the line to finish, or perhaps with luck to get on the podium and to get a medal, or hopefully the gold medal? They're on their knees, and it is their mind that is actually doing it. So that was really where the idea came from, thinking let's actually look at this in a different perspective. I'd also worked in other areas. Not everyone will know this, but there's something called equine facilitated learning. And because I have always been involved with horses and my own sport was eventing, I got into this just out of curiosity. People were using horses in a very, very different way to teach them about themselves and to actually learn how they communicated amongst each other. And so I trained with this, and it was an absolute eye-opener, because a horse can pick up your heart rate from over 10 meters away. Now, we don't have a clue what our heart rate's doing, from 1 minute to the next, unless we're perhaps exercising and measuring it for sport or something like that. And then they know, I knew a bit about the emotion side, because obviously they always can sense if you're feeling confident and calm that day. If you're not, they don't want you riding them, and they certainly don't want, you to take them around a cross-country course, which has got 6 foot wide ditches and, pretty high fences and all that kind of stuff. So that bit I got, but the other stuff and the way they communicate was just amazing. And I thought, we are blind to this. There is so much in this world that we just walk past every day. And I could see how this was actually going to help train people's minds. I've also worked in forest school, in the care system as well. So you're working with youth offenders, selective mute, loads and loads of different situations, and forest school is fantastic for bringing out that a different side of somebody. And so I just sat there going, well, perhaps I need to cherry pick all the best bits from all my careers to date. And I literally went through all the best bits. I suppose one of the best bits for the coaching for me was when people came back to me and said, oh, I took that home, and yet I was giving them a riding lesson or coaching them rugby. So that I think I sort of took that away from it. The equine facilitated learning. One thing that I always laugh about now is I was the person that would be employed to teach you stable management and employed, to teach you how to ride. And I was given this tiny little pony, the smallest little thing ever, asked to do an exercise with it, could do it standing on my head. Obviously, this was my career. It was absolutely fine. And then I got asked to actually project a person that I found difficult onto the pony and imagine that they were that person. So because of my childhood, I actually projected my mother on that pony. And I will never forget that, because as long as I was actually thinking that that was my mother, I could not get that pony to do anything. I couldn't even get it to walk. I couldn't get it to move sideways, to walk forwards, backwards, nothing. Even if I tried to physically push it, it was going nowhere. And I just couldn't understand this. And I remember the trainer who was training me just literally bellowed across the field going, who on earth is that? And I just stood there and I just went, my mother. And again, I thought, wow, that is my mind. I haven't done anything different. I know how to handle this animal. But it was my mind that stopped me. So all these different things from the careers that I'd taken and worked in, I thought we need to do something to make it accessible so that people can have better lives. Whether you're using it from the perspective of achieving success because you're coming back from an injury in your sport, or you are actually wanting a goal within the workplace or whatever, your mind gets you there. Whether it's from the perspective of preventing mental health problems or the far more serious side, even more serious side of preventing suicide, if we understand our minds and we train them and we prioritize them from day to day as people do diets and fitness, then actually we can use the mind for all these three things within the education sector, within families, within the business sector. And to be perfectly honest, one minute I am working with a sports person who perhaps wants to compete at a high level, or I'm working with a company that wants, the risk of male suicide, for example, in the workplace. The way I train is no different, simply because the mind is the mind. It works the same way. It's just the way people's minds had been programmed. As I said, my mind had been programmed completely the wrong way, simply because I'd grown up with an abusive childhood, both at home and at school. My subconscious mind was telling me that this is the norm. And so if we can actually teach how the mind works, which isn't currently done, and actually understand an individual's mind, how their individual mind is affecting them and the other influences around them affecting them, then it's hugely, hugely powerful. So yeah, when I was doing sports coaching 20 years ago, if you said I was doing this now, I would have looked at you and told you were stupid. But it's amazing the way it has evolved.
Yeah. Thank you, Harry. A really amazing story, and loving the story about the pony, that energy, what was in your mind, what was in your, I'm a big believer in energy as well as the mind, and the two, there's it's one super system, if you like, rather than a head and a body. There is mind, there is subconscious, there is body, and there is also energy, and animals are particularly good at sensing it. It's a really beautiful story. I sometimes say, no, if you'd said 10 years ago, this is what I'd be doing now, I think a lot of people go, bloody hell. But I say, I've been training my whole life for this. All those little bits and bobs of skills, all the sort of fire and brimstone in the early days, the difficult stuff, then all the different jobs, the relationships, everything brings you to now, and brings you with the unique gift that you have. So, yeah. So who are you working with? You mentioned organisations, sports people. I know that we've talked about young people in schools. So you said we're not teaching this stuff at the moment. What should we be doing?
A very, very simple start. It's not difficult to start. It is literally looking at the mind separately. So in the education system, you don't have the French lesson and the maths lesson all together in the same room because it just doesn't work. There's perhaps psychology that's taught, there's perhaps biology, but still there's nothing about the day-to-day function of the mind. And I do find that the subjects that sort of skirt around the edge of it are talking historically. And you do get a lot of information historically. The legal system works like that as well. They're always looking for past cases as examples of how they make a decision to move forward. Now, to me, that's completely mad. Why are you actually looking in the past for a situation that you can relate to in order to make a current decision now? The world is evolving all the time. We are in an ocean of motion. Nothing stands still for any of us, anywhere across the world and the universe. So why are we actually looking to the past to make a decision? What you need to do is you need to learn what is happening now, be open to that, and actually give people, whether it's a manager or a line manager at work, or whether it's a member of staff at school, the ability to recognize straight away, instantaneously, what someone's mind is doing, whether it's positive or challenging, because then actually you can correct a situation if you need to and embrace it if it's fantastic. And actually, there's not enough embracing and the positive side of training the mind. There is a lot there to do with unpicking things that have gone wrong, addressing behaviour, addressing attitude of employees and students. And yes, obviously, that's really, really important. But part of it is actually, if you big up the good, you're actually retraining the mind. And these simple things aren't taught. I don't think I've ever actually to this day, even when you're working with kids that have been in very difficult situations but are getting support, whether it is through a counsellor or whatever, the support they get is amazing. You know, these counsellors, they do fantastic jobs, but these are all jobs that are needed because something has gone wrong. And the bit that I don't get is, why are we waiting for something to go wrong? It just does not make sense to me, whether we're talking about students in the education sector or employees in the corporate world. It does not make any sense, because we all function better, going back to the Olympian triathlete, if we actually know how to train our mind. The diet is better, and you are better at not shoving the chocolate cake in your mouth on the diet if your mind is working the right way. The same as your fitness program is, you are better at doing the fitness and the exercise in order to achieve your goal. So why are we not using this as information for absolutely everybody, rather than perhaps, I love music, so I can't believe I'm sitting here, rather than saying learning a musical instrument. Yes, a musical instrument is awesome. I love music. I'm there every single day listening to music. But actually, you're only really going to appreciate the music as much as possible if you know how to use your mind.
Thank you, Harry. That's really incredible, and that some of this could be leveled at almost any part of our society, where we are putting sticky blasters on gunshot wounds on everything, whether it's mental health, physical health, kind of justice, the adversarial court system, whatever it is. It's all way downstream. And I know a lot of charities, a lot of people doing very good work are always trying to swim upstream to try and put some prevention in place. And what you're saying here is that the prevention is just learn about the mind as early as possible in an age appropriate way, and then sort of ramp it up as people go through their development of what is required. But still, a movie like Inside Out has probably done more for mental health in the last 20 years than any government policy or any school education system. It just went, look, these are the emotions, this is how you recognize them, this is how the inside of your head works. Yeah, there's people, there are emotions, you need a dialogue, you need to listen. I just thought that was incredible. That a film could do more than all of these great minds and all the money and all the policy. So you're saying it's bringing in coaching of the mind early, and for you, is that school? When does that start?
Definitely school, and even as young as primary school, not key stage 1 but key stage 2, and as you say, it's done in stages. And the aim is to be successful in this, is to quite literally think about your mind before your feet touch the floor when you're getting out of bed in the morning, to keep thinking about your mind throughout the day, whatever you're doing, because actually if you address how your mind is doing, you will be more successful in what you're doing, or manage the challenge better. And then actually when you go to bed at night, you are literally going, what is my mind doing? Because the repetitive training and awareness is how to train your mind properly, and then you can cope with the challenges. We spoke earlier about the things in life that don't go your way, and society that is stuck in a system. I mean, from a personal perspective, I have experienced the legal system not necessarily being right. The legal system is the legal system, and I've been stuck in it on several occasions. I mentioned earlier with the guy from school, and you are going through that for months and months on end. Later on in my life, with a divorce which took 7-8 years. and living conditions being absolutely horrendous for me and my kids, with no heating, no insulation, glass falling out of windows, and I didn't have access to my money to actually put these things in place. And yet I was also told if I moved out, I was actually not going to be allowed back in again. So I'm sitting there going, the legal system is telling me to actually stay in this situation. And when you are in situations where you are living with them day in, day out, and you're cooking on an individual gas burner for your kids, and you don't have a kitchen, and you don't have a sink or an oven or whatever, this is your mind being trained the wrong way. And then you go to somebody for help. In my case, the legal system, but I was in a loophole. And when you are in these situations that are completely out of your control, if you haven't been taught how the mind works, how your mind specifically works, and what you can do to help yourself, no wonder people are actually going in their numbers as they do to go on medication, and the GPs are giving it out. And then further down the line, those dark days, and your mind is spiraling out of control, and you don't know what to do to stop it. And you have to have these skills. To me, this is just common sense. Hopefully somebody's not going to be in the extreme situation that I've been in, with living conditions like that for day to day, but that's impressing your subconscious mind, and also it makes it the norm. So a rubbish situation like that, as before with my childhood, you think that's the norm. And unless these things are actually taught on how the mind works, nobody is ever going to be able to make it through life without actually being on the medication, and then perhaps sitting there going, I want the pain to go away, the only way is to take my life. And they are absolutely drastic alternatives. And I look at what I've been through, and somebody else's perspective of my story will be, don't know what she's worried about. That's fine. That's their perspective. That's how their mind is trained. That's their experience. Somebody else will be listening to my story, and probably I'll give them a big virtual hug, be in floods of tears, because it's really affected them, and they're going, oh my God, I can't believe she's been through this much. But in a way, that doesn't matter, because that is dictated to them as to how their mind is doing. But if this isn't taught, how do they know that? And how do they know how to change it? And how do they know how to make their lives better and to manage things? Because the mind is the foundation for absolutely everything.
Thank you. Very passionate words. I think the need for a sort of humaning 101 curriculum is just seems like a no-brainer to me. That the first thing you teach people as they grow, you hope that these things are happening at home. They're not always going to be, because of people's experiences, because of their own lives. But when they come into schools, you can start to make a difference with these things. And of course, if these things are happening at school, the parents start to learn about them and understand them, and they can get on board and challenge some of their own beliefs. And there is this lovely relationship between kind of parent, school and child that can develop very positively. But yeah, without understanding how our mind works, or that there is a mind-body link, or that we hold trauma and energy in our bodies, or any of these things that we now know to be true. 30 years ago this was all woo-woo stuff. Now we know it's people meditate, people do yoga. It's not weird. It's just very helpful. But yeah, we're very much trapped in the sort of treatment, the medication, and the last resort stuff you've talked about with suicide prevention, rather than swimming upstream. So that's.
And I think another key thing is actually making sure that if you do choose to learn this, good on you, fantastic. And there are so many things out there, for example, the mental health first aid certificates, all that, absolutely amazing. But that's actually not a solution, because again, we're supporting. So I think one of the key things is, if you are actually wanting to take the plunge to do this and put it in your place of work, put it in your school, your college, actually make sure you're doing it the right way, because otherwise all your energy is going in for a very, very good reason, but actually is only going to come out with half the job. It's a bit like, one of my sons plays the saxophone. I was so jealous. I've always wanted to play the saxophone. I'm sure he did it just to upset me. But as a result, I said, okay, this is the deal. You have to teach me how to play the saxophone. So I started. He was a very, very patient coach. I thought he did very, very well. And he was telling me how to read the music because I'd forgotten from school how to read music and everything. But I didn't continue practicing it. If somebody says to me, can you play the saxophone? I could quite legitimately sit there and go, oh yes, I can play the saxophone, but can I do, these songs and listen to the music and be in the band and everything that he's in? Of course not. And I think that's another really, really important thing to understand with the mind. You can actually kid yourself that you know what your mind is doing, you know about the mind, but actually it's a completely different subject in itself, and you have to treat it like learning a new hobby or a new skill.
Thank you, Harry. Very clear. So as we start to bring things to an end in our time together, I could talk for hours, but because we've got so many areas that we could go into. So we talked about your work, resilience coaching, resilience training and coaching the mind. Talked about your book, touched on it and your work there, and of course suicide prevention and the podcast. So just on those last couple of topics of suicide prevention and the podcast, is there anything you wanted to convey to the people listening, anything you wanted to get across?
Thank you. I think what springs to mind is a response in a review of my training at the end of last year, where I was training with regards to suicide in the workplace, and I was working with many different sectors. There were oncologists, there were lawyers, there were fire crew. It was wonderful. It was so fantastic to be with such an amazing mix of people. And at the end of it, we did get amazing reviews. I mean, it was absolutely brilliant. But as always, there are things to be improved on and people's perspective. And one of the questions was, Harry, we love this approach because we are actually understanding now that this is how the mind works. This is what we have to focus on in order to genuinely prevent suicide in the workplace. And then the question they asked was, but this isn't very organisation based. We're talking about a business here. We're talking about the workplace. And I said, yes, this course is specifically set up for the workplace, but it's the individual that commits suicide. And it is individuals that make up your workplace. Your office building, just like in the pandemic, was suddenly very, very empty, as though it wasn't your offices at all. And I think that is a key thing to get across when you are looking at training to prevent suicide, which is a huge sweeping statement in itself. That could be a whole nother podcast, couldn't it? Because obviously we can't do it for everybody. It's very, very complex. But there is so much we can do. But what you have to do is you have to treat it as an individual. Whilst I might go into a workplace, whether it's in the education sector or any industry, you have to treat it as an individual thing, because it is the individual's mind that is causing them to not manage with the circumstances that is around them and that hasn't got the resilience that's there. So I would say think of it always as an individual, not an industry or a sector.
Yeah, thank you, Harry. Yeah, I very much resonate with that. And sadly, after the suicide numbers in the UK were dropping for a period of time, they've now been steadily climbing again, as we know. Very much, I think three in every four people committing suicide are male. Middle-aged men, particularly, the numbers are really rising, but also young people as well. So, there is a crisis there that needs to be met. For anyone who, I've had my dark days in my life and thought, what, I just can't do it anymore. It's too painful. I've had enough. I'm done fighting. I just feel like I've been fighting my whole life. I'm just done. I'm just out of fight. But what got me up through those dark days was a couple of the people in my life. They kept me going long enough to get help, and I reached out and I found the right coach, and I did everything, all the diet, all the exercise, threw the kitchen sink at it, and survived. And I've heard so many stories of how people have pulled themselves through those dark times. But if anyone's listening right now who's really suffering, is there anything you would like to leave them with as an idea or a thought or a plan of action?
The pain you're feeling at the moment is just horrendous. And Chris, your words of, I just don't want to fight anymore, I resonate with that too. It's just exhausting. It is absolutely exhausting. And when you are in that place, the mind is getting darker and the mind spirals faster and faster into that darkness. But the thing to remember is that the mind is never standing still. So there is always the ability of actually change. We were talking earlier about we are in a world that's the ocean of motion. We are never standing still. And even when you're exhausted and you don't want to fight anymore and you are completely sick of the fact that for years, months, days, whatever the situation is, it's personal to you, you are feeling as though you can't bear it anymore. The one thing I would want you to remember is the fact that the mind is hugely powerful and it is not going to stay in the same place. It is not going to stay there. And so it is something that you can get through. It is very sad that with the podcast I've been doing, the words that come out are shame, embarrassed, didn't want to ask for help. And these people are always repeating the same words. I didn't reach out much for help when I needed help. But it is knowing if you are trying to get through this by yourself because it is too hard for you to reach out, or you don't have anyone to reach out to, which is quite often the case as well, that you won't be in this situation forever. And one thing actually that someone said on one of my podcast interviews, the Saving Lives podcast, was that she felt the advice that she gave now, I absolutely agree with, is as soon as your mind has in anywhere in the vicinity of, I don't want to be here anymore, or you start thinking about how you are actually going to take your life, that should ring alarm bells. That is when actually you decide, I need to be brave, I need to ask for help, or you sit there and start changing things for yourself wherever you can in order to change the cycle. Because if you don't recognize it at the beginning, you are retraining your mind again over and over and over again, because that's how the subconscious mind works, that suicide is the way forward. So I would say always, as soon as you feel this, recognize it and then go, what can we do about it? As I say, some people have the support, some people don't. Some people have the strength to reach out, some people have to do it for themselves. Everyone's different as well. But I would say it's those two things. As soon as you have it, recognize it so that you can stop it in its tracks. And then know that the mind is never staying the same. So whilst you are thinking this for very justified reasons, you know, they are always very, very justified reasons, the mind will change and it won't be like that forever.
Thank you, Harry. Very powerful words, and we'll make sure, included in the show notes on this podcast, places you can go if you're worried about yourself or someone else. I know the game changer for me is when I heard I am not my thoughts. Someone said that to me when I was at my absolute lowest moment. My coach, Piers Cross, he just said, you are not your thoughts. And I suddenly realized there was more than one voice. There was a greater self. And then there was my conscious mind, my left brain thinking, my structures, all the neural pathways that I've carved all my life. I was like, oh, it was a light bulb moment that when I had those dark or strange or troubling thoughts, they were just thoughts, and that is not me. So on that note, we'll have to finish up and say goodbye today. But Harry, it's been an absolute pleasure to have your time, to have your words, your journey, and the work that you now do. I deeply honour what you're doing now. It's important work, and I hope we can support each other in some way to try and bring knowledge of the mind, emotion coaching, understanding into the educational spaces, and to keep talking about suicide prevention. So a huge thanks to you today.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work you do as well.
Thanks very much. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for listening.